On the horizon of life, as time leaves its indelible marks, elderly individuals face dilemmas that many try to avoid. Where to find peace, whether to maintain independence, choose to live near family, or entrust oneself to the care of a specialized institution. These questions have no easy answers, as they touch not only on living conditions but also delve into the very essence of human existence. A sense of self-worth, the need for personal space, the desire for freedom of choice, and the burden of unrealized dreams. Many people enter their mature years with the hope of being surrounded by an atmosphere of care and gratitude for the years dedicated to loved ones. However, the reality is often different. Heartfelt conversations with children do not always bring the desired emotional warmth, and living independently can turn into loneliness and longing. At the same time, contrary to popular belief, geriatric care facilities can provide a more dignified quality of life than a neglected home where an elderly person is left without proper attention. In light of this, what path should one choose to live out their remaining years with dignity, without feeling like a burden to others, but also without experiencing the bitterness of loneliness and oblivion? The answer to this question is something each person must find for themselves, weighing all the pros and cons, so that the final years of life become a worthy conclusion to a long journey. Many dream of an idyllic picture of peaceful old age surrounded by loving relatives, like a quiet harbor after years devoted to family. It is natural to assume that after decades dedicated to caring for the home, this period of life will be filled with mutual love, care, and unwavering attention from loved ones. However, as is often the case, harsh reality intervenes. Grown children, building their own lives, burden themselves with many obligations, start their own families, and become engrossed in the daily grind. And although their love for their parents remains unchanged, the time they can devote to them becomes increasingly scarce. Living with children, alas, is no guarantee of constant communication and emotional closeness. Often, such proximity brings more bitter disappointments than bright moments of joy. Unjustified expectations of round-the-clock attention can be shattered by the rapid pace of modern life. And what seemed like a wonderful opportunity for bonding turns into a painful feeling of alienation and loneliness. When an elderly person moves into their children's home, they enter a space with an already established order and a developed dynamic of relationships. Even minor changes in the usual way of life become noticeable. Established daily routines, individual tastes, and even minor quirks can clash. While children are busy with professional obligations and grandchildren are engrossed in the digital world, elderly parents find themselves in a difficult position between memories of the past and a sense of lostness in the present. Often, even living in the same house, an elderly person feels lonely. Conversations are interrupted midway, family dinners turn into quick formalities, and expressions of care give way to everyday rush. Excessive expectations from others inevitably lead to disappointment. This feeling arises from the vast difference between what is expected and what actually exists, a gap that can be particularly painful in relationships between aging parents and adult children. Once an elderly woman, facing declining health, accepted her daughter's offer to move in with her. At first, it seemed like the perfect solution, the proximity of a loved one, the necessary help, and the opportunity to strengthen family ties. The first few days gave hope. There was a feeling of emotional warmth and confidence that old age would not be lonely. However, over time, everyday life revealed a sad truth. The daughter left for work early in the morning and returned late in the evening, always tired. The son-in-law, usually polite, avoided long conversations, preferring silence, broken only by the sounds of the television or mobile phone. The grandchildren, completely immersed in their devices, paid little attention to her. Surrounded by a loving family, the elderly woman unexpectedly faced a crushing sense of loneliness. Her days flowed in oppressive silence, devoid of the opportunity to share overwhelming thoughts and feelings. The infrequent moments of communication with loved ones were fleeting and superficial, limited to routine questions about health or minor household requests. Once, attempting to start a heartfelt conversation, she heard her daughter respond, "Mom, I'm sorry, I have absolutely no time right now. I'm very busy." This phrase, spoken without a hint of malice, echoed painfully in her heart, becoming a bitter reminder of how much reality had diverged from her previous perceptions. It was then that she realized that living under the same roof as family doesn't guarantee a sense of belonging. The home lived by others' rules and routines. Her own place in it seemed to dissolve, and her presence, however modest and unobtrusive, was perceived only as a minor addition to someone else's established daily life. It's naive to assume that family is an inexhaustible source of unclouded happiness and constant attention. The love of children certainly doesn't weaken over time, but their life priorities inevitably change. And placing all hopes on cohabitation to find emotional closeness and constant attention can lead to agonizing disappointment. In such circumstances, gaining independence, even partial, seems a more mature and wise decision. Having personal space, even in close proximity to relatives, allows you to maintain such important autonomy while avoiding unrealistic expectations and bitter resentments. Ultimately, simple physical presence nearby doesn't always mean genuine closeness and understanding. And there is hardly anything more painful and heartbreaking than feeling like a stranger and unwanted in your own home. Old age confronts a person with a dilemma: how to maintain independence without becoming a burden to others, and avoid loneliness when support is especially important. The desire for independence, to be able to make one's own decisions and live according to one's own mind, clashes with the fear of being isolated without the necessary help. Experience shows that the less a person depends on others, the less often they experience disappointments associated with their imperfections. Inevitable. Dependence breeds expectations and therefore the risk of encountering a reality that doesn't always meet those expectations. However, absolute solitude can be a source of anxiety, especially when health begins to require more attention. As a compromise that can balance these extremes, one can consider living alone but in close proximity to family. This arrangement allows the elderly person to maintain their usual rhythm of life and independence while ensuring access to support if needed. It's not just the place of residence that matters, but also how a person adapts to a new stage of life, finding ways to maintain dignity and emotional comfort. Living with children can mean giving up personal life and having to obey someone else's schedule, which isn't always the optimal solution. The prospect of moving to a nursing home is often seen as a final line, marking a complete loss of independence, while living in one's own house or apartment requires not only careful preparation, but also a special mindset that can appreciate the joy of solitude. The key question here isn't simply how realistic independent living is in old age, but how comfortable such a choice can be. Many elderly people fear loneliness, but often overlook the fact that true loneliness isn't the absence of people nearby, but rather the absence of deep inner meaning and goals. Often, it's much preferable to enjoy the peace and quiet in solitude than to be surrounded by superficial and exhausting social connections. After all, aren't there many examples of people surrounded by family and friends who still feel a deep sense of detachment and longing? For independent living to bring true satisfaction and joy, an elderly person needs to rediscover the connection with themselves, build a clear daily routine filled with pleasant and interesting activities, maintain light and unburdensome social contacts, and accept as a given that life at any age requires conscious fulfillment and personal effort. Consider the example of an elderly man who, after the death of his beloved wife, faced a difficult choice about where to spend the rest of his days. His son offered him to move into his house and take the spare room, but the father had serious doubts. He didn't want to become a burden to his family, and most importantly, didn't want to feel that his existence depended entirely on someone else's goodwill. In the end, he found a wise compromise solution. He rented a small but cozy apartment just a few blocks from his son's house. Thus, he was able to maintain his usual lifestyle and independence without disrupting the established life. Of the young family, but could always count on quick help and support if needed. Initially, this decision plunged him into a state of anxiety and mental torment. Sleepless nights dragged on excruciatingly long, and the silence at the dining table, where lively conversations used to take place, evoked melancholy. However, as time went on, an unexpected discovery awaited him. Loneliness presented itself not as a punishment, but as a unique opportunity for self-discovery and personal growth. He could now wake up at a time when his body felt rested and full of energy, preparing meals for himself without haste, savoring every moment of the culinary process. He dedicated more time to reading captivating books and taking leisurely walks in the fresh air, which brought peace and new experiences. He could visit his son and beloved grandchildren whenever his heart desired, without feeling awkward or fearing that he might be an unwelcome guest. Having chosen independence, the elderly man realized that old age is not a burden to be carried with difficulty, nor a reason to indulge in regrets about lost youth. It is simply a new chapter in his life, which he was determined to live with honor and dignity. The main lesson that the pursuit of independence in old age teaches is that solitude does not always mean loneliness. Old age can become a time for deep reflection on life, a time for realizing postponed plans and gaining long-awaited freedom if one learns to appreciate it for what it is, without unattainable hopes and illusions. Having one's own space where one can be alone with oneself and the absence of direct dependence on children allows one to maintain a sense of self-identity, a sense of control over one's own life and autonomy. True happiness comes when a person feels self-sufficient and independent of external circumstances. Independence in old age, when it is achievable, is not an escape from the world, but a priceless gift of freedom. It gives the elderly person the right to manage their life as they see fit, without being subject to the will of others. This is not just a matter of convenience, but a conscious choice of life philosophy, a recognition that freedom has always been one of the most significant treasures. When it comes to specialized institutions for the elderly, many immediately conjure up an image of loneliness and abandonment. The very thought of being cut off from loved ones, deprived of the opportunity to make decisions independently, evokes feelings of fear and rejection. After all, historically, family values have always placed the care of parents for children at the forefront throughout life. But how justified is such a prejudice? Is every nursing home truly a symbol of oblivion and uselessness? Or, in certain situations, can it become a chance for a dignified and fulfilling life? It is important to remember that it is not the place that determines our happiness, but how we live, wherever we are. This question becomes especially relevant when we see how many elderly people spend their last years alone in their own apartments, suffering from a lack of social interaction, social activity, and often necessary care. There is a belief that being in one's own home automatically ensures happiness, but this is not always the case. On the other hand, not every nursing home bears the stamp of loneliness and oblivion. In reality, the quality of life of an elderly person in a specialized institution depends not on the name, but on the atmosphere that prevails in it and the opportunities it provides for a full life. The aversion to nursing homes often arises from an idealized image of old age. It is believed that this period of life should take place in the company of loved ones, in the warmth of the family hearth, but this is not always possible. It is often overlooked that the cohabitation of several generations is not always the optimal solution. The problem lies not only in the lack of time of relatives, but also in the modern realities of life. Children are immersed in work, grandchildren are busy with studies and personal interests, and the elderly person often experiences a lack of communication. In addition, a serious factor is the state of health. Caring for an elderly person requires not only time, but also certain skills and knowledge that many relatives do not possess. Ultimately, such a situation can become a burden for both parties, turning care and love into a burdensome duty. In a good nursing home, an elderly person finds not only shelter, but also a whole world of communication, safety, and interesting activities, once again filling their life with meaning. Instead of the agonizing feeling of being a burden to loved ones, they find themselves in an atmosphere that favorably affects the quality of their life. One elderly man had long categorically rejected the very idea of a nursing home, seeing it as a last frontier before complete oblivion, a symbol that he no longer represented value to others. For years he had led a solitary life in his own home. His children visited him on weekends, but their time was filled with cares and errands. On weekdays his life had become a routine, waking up, a cup of coffee, watching TV, and anxiously waiting for a phone call that might never come. As time went on, his health deteriorated. Memory lapses became more frequent. He had difficulty performing simple household tasks, and constant fatigue became his constant companion. Eventually, his children insisted that he at least try living in a nursing home. With a heavy heart and seeing no other options, he yielded to their persuasion. Upon arrival at the facility, his first impression was oppressive. He felt like an outsider, as if he had truly reached the threshold of decline. But as the days went by, something amazing happened. He found that he was no longer alone. There were peers around, people with similar fates, open to communication and ready to share their life experiences. He began to participate in various activities, rediscovered the joy of board games, outdoor walks, and even small excursions organized by the facility. Moreover, fate brought him an unexpected reunion with an old childhood friend who also happened to be in the home. Their conversations became an integral part of his routine, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger. Inner torment stems from an unwillingness to accept inevitable changes, while accepting reality can bring a sense of freedom and relief. One wise old man realized that the source of his dissatisfaction lay not in a specific place, but in his subjective perception of the situation. The main lesson of this instructive story is that the fear of impending changes is often far more painful and exhausting than the changes themselves, once they have already occurred. Of course, not all specialized facilities for the elderly meet high standards of quality. Unfortunately, some of them do not provide the proper care and attention that an elderly person needs so much. That is why choosing a suitable place with decent living conditions and a friendly, welcoming atmosphere is of paramount importance. This statement is also true for any other important decision made in adulthood. The quality of our lives is invariably determined by the environment and the nature of our interactions with loved ones. Often it is erroneous perceptions and illusions that bind us more strongly than the circumstances in which we find ourselves. The fundamental mistake lies not in choosing a specialized institution for the elderly, but in the persistent pursuit of an ideal that has irrevocably lost its relevance in the changed realities. What is truly important is that each person at the sunset of their life soberly and objectively assesses the current conditions and makes a balanced decision that will allow them to live their remaining years with dignity, in safety, and, most importantly, without agonizing torment and regrets about the past. The relentless passage of time dictates its own laws. Children enter adulthood, while parents, on the contrary, approach the sunset of their lives. For many years, many fathers and mothers selflessly dedicate themselves to caring for the younger generation, putting their hearts into the upbringing, education, and protection of their sons and daughters, with the hope that one day their efforts will be rewarded 100-fold. The cherished dream of every parent is to feel the warmth of gratitude and the tireless care of those for whom so many sacrifices and restrictions have been made in old age. However, harsh reality often makes its own adjustments to these bright expectations. It often happens that elderly people face feelings of abandonment, neglect, and even bitter resentment from their grown-up offspring. The time that once belonged entirely to them now seems insignificant and secondary. Meetings become rare and fleeting, conversations are hurried and superficial. The feeling of loneliness steadily increases, like rust corroding the soul. Nevertheless, it is important to remember and understand that the relationship between parents and children is, first and foremost, a complex biological process, not an immutable bond of eternal duty and obligation. Children have no control over the fact of their birth, and upon reaching adulthood, quite naturally strive to build their own lives and destinies, just as their parents once did. The widespread notion that children are obliged to fully compensate for parental care is more of a subjective expectation of parents than an immutable law of existence. The root of the problem lies not so much in the lack of love from offspring, but in the erroneous belief of the older generation that gratitude will flow continuously and manifest itself unconditionally. Fruitless expectation of constant recognition and attention can create a deep sense of disappointment. The relentless passage of time invariably alters relationships. In the early years, parents are undeniably the center of the universe for their children. However, as the younger generation matures, new priorities emerge, such as building a career, pursuing romantic relationships, caring for their own offspring, and overcoming personal challenges. The attention that was once wholly focused on parents inevitably disperses, shifting to new objects. It is important to emphasize that this shift in no way indicates a waning of love. The pace of modern life and the weight of new responsibilities gradually distance children from their parents, sometimes unintentionally. For older people, this distancing can result in a painful sense of abandonment, while for their children it is a natural course of events, a reflection of life's inexorable flow. As is well known, the root cause of human suffering is often unfulfilled expectations. Those who place excessive hopes on others will inevitably encounter bitter disappointment sooner or later. Perhaps the most profound misconception many parents have is the naive belief that their children will always be willing to provide them with the same level of care and attention they themselves received in their childhood years. However, the cycle of life is not based on the principle of repaying past care, but on the idea of generational continuity. Just as in past eras, children left their parents' homes, seeking to create their own families and build their own lives, the modern generation is repeating this historical path. The fallacy lies not in the fact of children distancing themselves, but in their naive belief that they should act differently from their predecessors. Consider the story of a woman who selflessly dedicated her life to raising her children. She worked tirelessly, surrounded them with care, and gave up personal ambitions and desires to provide them with a bright future. She never complained about the sacrifices, sincerely believing that in her old age her children would surround her with attention, returning all the love and selflessness she had given them. However, when old age arrived, her expectations were not met. Her children, consumed by their own worries and aspirations, were not quick to visit her. Calls became brief, meetings infrequent. When they did come, they brought with them an atmosphere of haste and a sense of duty, as if they were fulfilling an obligation. The woman tried to start a conversation, share memories, but felt that no one was truly listening to her. One day, unable to bear it any longer, she confessed to one of her children that she missed the times when they were little and spent whole days together. Her son, unaware of the depth of her words and emotional pain, replied with a smile, "Mom, life goes on, doesn't it? Now I have to take care of my own family. I have my own responsibilities." At that moment, the realization she had been avoiding for so long dawned on her. No one had abandoned her. She was simply expecting something from her children that they could not give her, not understanding that each generation has its own priorities and its own life path. The lion's share of the torments that plague humanity grows from the soil of unfulfilled hopes and vain expectations. Those who can curb this harmful habit within themselves will undoubtedly lessen the burden of their suffering. The protagonist of the story did not immediately discover this simple truth, but over time she realized that the long-awaited gratitude would not appear before her in the guise she had imagined. Perhaps it is time to learn to live according to one's own interests and needs without looking back at the opinions of others. One of the most important lessons that maturity teaches us is the realization that no one owes anyone anything. Children, of course, do not stop loving their parents, but their love transforms, takes on different forms, different from the all-consuming love that parents feel for their children. While a parent's view still sees their children as the meaning of their existence, the children themselves are irresistibly drawn forward to new achievements and to the creation of their own unique stories. Those who enter maturity consumed by an insatiable thirst for recognition and gratitude risk being trapped in resentment and loneliness. True wisdom lies in the ability to accept life in all its diversity and fullness, and not in the futile attempts to squeeze it into the Procrustean bed of one's own ideas. Mature years should not be overshadowed by regrets about unreceived recognition. On the contrary, they should become a period of gaining inner freedom and independence. One should once and for all abandon the illusory expectation that others are obliged to act in accordance with our desires and learn to live the time allotted to us with greater ease, generosity, and leniency towards the imperfection of this world. The relentless march of time leads every person to a period of maturity, but the ability to accept this stage of life is not granted to everyone. Some people tend to see old age as a decline, a series of losses and limitations, while others desperately resist its onset, as if hoping to stop the relentless passage of time. But there are also those who discover new horizons in maturity, finding the opportunity to live, relying on the wisdom of years lived and freed from the burden of unjustified expectations. The key to a serene old age lies in accepting reality without illusions. Suffering most often arises not from age itself, but from a fruitless struggle with what cannot be changed. Many elderly people experience anxiety caused by inflated expectations from others, attention, recognition, care. However, true happiness lies not in hopes for children, family, or society, but in what a person can do for themselves. Old age can bring loneliness, but being surrounded by people does not always guarantee true closeness. Often, relationships are superficial, maintained more by formalities than by genuine emotional connection. It often happens that a person surrounded by family experiences a deep sense of isolation. For some, living with children becomes a source of comfort and closeness. During maturity, life priorities undergo changes. Some find respite in solitude and self-analysis, while others, on the contrary, strive to strengthen family ties and enjoy communication with loved ones, with whom they have shared years of life. Undoubtedly, each person passes through this stage of life in their own way, finding their unique path. The main question that faces every person who has reached old age is how to meet old age with dignity. Is it worth surrounding yourself with people, even if communication with them does not always bring the desired joy and satisfaction? Or should one maintain independence and self-sufficiency, accepting possible loneliness? At times, the search for an answer to this question turns into a difficult task with no clear solution. The experience of aging is shaped by the decisions made, but also by circumstances beyond human control. Everyone is free to choose their place of residence, determine their circle of acquaintances, and ways to spend their leisure time. However, no one can control the feelings and intentions of other people, forcing them to show more attention and care than they are willing or able to offer. In this regard, true happiness in old age should not depend on the presence of other people. It should grow from the depths of the soul, from the ability to find meaning and joy in one's own existence. For some people, solitude and the opportunity to be alone with themselves are more preferable than imposed communication that does not bring sincere joy. Ultimately, it is important not to blindly follow some idealized notions of old age, but to strive for harmony between the desired and the possible, between the need for communication and the desire for independence. Only then can one find peace of mind and meet old age with dignity. Emotional dependence poses a serious threat to a person's well-being. The more an individual needs the approval and support of others to feel complete in life, the more they are prone to suffering caused by rejection or shattered hopes. That is why, in old age, the key factor is not the presence of loved ones nearby, but the ability to maintain self-respect and independence. Accepting old age implies freeing oneself from the pangs of conscience associated with the desire to live in one's own interests. Many elderly people spend their days trying to please their children, fearing becoming a burden to them and suppressing their own desires. However, what is the point of dedicating one's whole life to others if, having reached old age, a person is still bound by a sense of duty? True peace of mind comes when an individual learns to live in harmony with themselves. If it is not possible to change others, one can always change one's attitude to life. And old age can well become a period of true freedom. Freedom to say no to what no longer matters, to avoid places where you are not welcome, to choose your company to your liking, and to follow your own rhythm. Ultimately, age does not deprive a person of the right to happiness. On the contrary, this aspiration should only intensify with age. Old age should not turn into an endless wait for a visit from children, a phone call, or a sign of attention. Time is relentless, and passively waiting for recognition or company can be the shortest path to resentment and disappointment. Peace of mind grows from getting rid of fruitless hopes and focusing on personal opportunities. In the period of maturity, each person paves their unique path. Some find support in closeness with their offspring, others strive for independence, and still others find peace in solitude. And none of these choices are objectionable if made after mature reflection rather than under the pressure of external factors. Of paramount importance is the preservation of self-respect, the continuation of an independent existence, without allowing the burden of past years or unfulfilled dreams to influence the present. Old age is not the final part of the life path, but just a new period, and everyone is free to decide for themselves how to live it.